April 1943. In a small, heavily guarded workshop in southern England, engineers gathered around a rotating steel sphere, spinning at 500 revolutions per minute. The man overseeing the test wasn't a general or an Air Force ace. He was an engineer named Barnes Neville Wallis, and what he was about to prove could change the course of the air war. By the early 1940s, Britain's bombing campaign against Germany was failing to achieve decisive results. Factories, oil depots and railways were rebuilt faster than they were destroyed. Intelligence identified the Ruhr Valley as Germany's industrial heart. Its network of hydroelectric dams powered the entire region's production. Destroying them could paralyze the German war machine. But no existing weapon could breach reinforced concrete walls 40 meters thick, protected by torpedo nets and anti-aircraft fire. Wallis proposed something the Air Ministry found absurd: a bomb that would skip across water like a stone. The idea was based on physics, not fantasy. A spinning sphere could rebound over a lake, clear the nets, strike a dam, sink to the right depth, and detonate underwater, using the pressure wave to fracture the structure from its base. When Wallis first presented his 1942 memorandum titled Spherical Bomb, Surface Torpedo, senior officials laughed it off. The RAF's priority was mass bombing, not experimental engineering. But Wallis refused to let it die. Using marbles, tin cans, and a homemade model dam in his garden, he demonstrated that a correctly backspinning object could indeed bounce and retain accuracy over long distances. Eventually, a handful of officers at the Ministry of Aircraft Production took notice. The calculations made sense, and the potential effect was enormous. Wallis was granted limited funding and a classified test site at Reculver Bay, Kent. There, his team from Vickers Armstrongs began dropping scaled prototypes from converted bombers over the sea. Cameras measured every bounce, splash, and impact angle. Each failure refined the next design, changing the weight, casing, and spin ratio. By late 1942, the prototype codenamed Upkeep was born, a 9,000-pound cylinder built to spin backwards at 500 RPM before release. It had to be dropped from exactly 60 feet at 232 miles per hour to reach the right trajectory. Precision that fine had never been demanded in aerial warfare. Pilots would need new altimeters, synchronized lights, and nerves of steel. The Air Ministry remained divided. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, head of Bomber Command, saw little value in one-off missions. He preferred carpet bombing to cripple morale. Wallis argued the opposite. 1,000 bombs might break windows, one properly placed can end a war effort. That tension defined the next months, an engineer against an empire of bureaucracy. Finally, in February 1943, Air Vice Marshal Ralph Cochrane and Group Captain Guy Gibson convinced command to form a special unit dedicated to the operation. It would be known as No. 617 Squadron, hand-picked from the RAF's elite. Their mission: to train for a weapon that didn't officially exist, against targets they weren't allowed to discuss. In the workshops of Vickers, Wallis personally oversaw every modification, altering release gear, calculating impact angles, even testing paint coatings for friction. The pressure was relentless. Each test failure brought him closer to losing government support. But on one cold afternoon at Reculver, a full-scale bomb finally skipped 5 times across the bay and struck the target dead center. The results were undeniable. After months of skepticism, Operation Chastise received final approval in April 1943. Wallis's concept had moved from backyard experiment to strategic weapon. Yet behind the success was a growing fear. The physics worked, but the mission demanded perfection. One error in speed, altitude, or spin would turn the bomb into a useless chunk of steel. Wallis knew that young pilots would soon stake their lives on his calculations. The stage was set. In the coming weeks, 617 Squadron would begin secret nighttime rehearsals over British reservoirs, flying just above treetop level. Every second would count, and as Wallis watched his invention take flight, he couldn't escape a single haunting question. Had he just engineered a miracle, or designed a weapon too precise for human hands to use? Spring 1943. The testing grounds at Reculver Bay became the center of one of Britain's most secret wartime projects. The weapon, codenamed Upkeep, was ready in theory, but in practice it demanded a level of precision that airmen had never attempted before. Every factor had to be exact: height, speed, spin, release angle, distance from the dam. A few feet too high or too low, and the bomb would skip off course, fail to sink, or detonate prematurely. Wallis worked side by side with the RAF engineers, personally supervising the technical modifications. The Lancaster bombers chosen for the mission were stripped of armor to reduce weight and fitted with massive rotating drums underneath their fuselages. These would spin the bombs backward at 500 RPM before release, using a hydraulic motor. 2 spotlights were mounted under the nose and belly. When their beams converged into a single circle on the water, the pilot knew he was exactly 60 feet above the surface. At RAF Scampton, a new squadron was forming, number 617 Squadron, led by Wing Commander Guy Gibson. The pilots were some of the best night flyers in the Royal Air Force. None were told exactly what they were preparing for. They practiced flying low across lakes and reservoirs at night, their bomb bays empty, their nerves tested by every passing tree and power line. Meanwhile, Wallis continued his calculations obsessively. He carried a slide rule and notepad everywhere, recalculating trajectories, water tension, and spin decay. To him, this wasn't just engineering, it was personal. He believed that strategic precision bombing, guided by mathematics, not brute force, could reduce civilian casualties by targeting key industrial nodes instead of entire cities. But convincing the High Command had come at a price. His weapon had to work perfectly the first time. By early May 1943, time had run out. Intelligence reports suggested the Ruhr dams were at their maximum capacity due to heavy spring rain, the best possible moment for an attack. The targets were selected: the Möhne, Eder, and Sorpe dams. The destruction of even one could cripple steel production and disrupt transport networks for months. Final trials were conducted at Fleet Lagoon in Dorset using live bombs. The results were mixed. Some tests were flawless, others complete failures. On May 13th, one bomb bounced erratically, striking the release aircraft's tail before falling into the sea. The weapon's tolerances were razor-thin, and the air crews had mere days left to master them. Inside the Air Ministry, debate raged. Arthur Harris, still skeptical, warned that the mission would cost lives for minimal gain. But Air Chief Marshal Portal and Ralph Cochrane believed otherwise. The operation was officially approved for mid-May. Wallis, exhausted and frail from months of overwork, attended the final briefing at Scampton. He laid out the physics one last time, sketching the dam's cross-section on a chalkboard and marking where the underwater detonation would hit. Every officer in the room watched in silence. Gibson later recalled that Wallis's hands shook slightly as he explained how one small error could mean complete failure. To test the bomb's detonation system, the engineers used controlled charges underwater. The weapon was designed to explode 30 feet below the surface, triggered by a hydrostatic fuse, the same principle used in naval mines. The resulting pressure wave could fracture even reinforced concrete. Then came the final challenge, loading the 9,000-pound bomb onto aircraft not designed to carry it. The modified Lancasters had their bomb doors removed and reinforced frames added. Ground crews used custom-built trolleys and winches to attach each upkeep bomb. There was no room for error. One slip could destroy the plane before takeoff. As the sun set on May 16, 1943, 19 Lancasters lined up on the runway at Scampton. The crews, most of them in their early 20s, received sealed envelopes revealing their true mission for the first time. Operation Chastise, the Dambusters Raid. In his workshop, Wallis waited for news, restless and uneasy. He had done everything humanly possible to ensure success, but now his equations were in the hands of young men flying into German airspace at treetop level. His invention, once a theoretical sketch, had become a weapon of war. At 21:28 hours, the first Lancaster lifted off into the fading light, heading east toward the North Sea. Wallis's wife later recalled him pacing the floor all night, unable to rest. He knew that every sound wave, every angle, every variable he had written down now determined whether the mission would change history or end in disaster. 1617 May 1943, the Ruhr Valley, Germany. At 21:28 on the evening of May 16th, 19 modified Avro Lancasters departed RAF Scampton, carrying a weapon that had existed on paper only months earlier. Their objective, the hydroelectric dams that powered Germany's industrial heart. The mission had a code name, Operation Chastise, and a single narrow aim, breach the dams and disrupt production in the Ruhr. Navigation and timing mattered more than firepower. The bombers crossed the North Sea, navigated along radio beacons, and approached the German coast at low altitude to evade radar. The task required flying at night, at treetop height, with a heavy, spinning bomb strapped beneath the fuselage. Crews used the specially fitted spotlights beneath the Lancaster noses to judge altitude. When the two beams met on the water, the pilot was at the required 60 feet. The first turning point came over the Möhne Reservoir. The formation approached from the west. On the run-in, anti-aircraft fire and searchlights increased. Several aircraft made attacks and returned with damage. Despite this, 3 aircraft successfully released their upkeep bombs in sequence. One bomb ricocheted across the water, struck the dam face, sank to depth, and detonated. The explosion fractured the wall. 7 million cubic meters of water poured through the breach. The resulting flood carried debris and destroyed infrastructure downstream. The second target, the Eder Dam, presented a different approach. Narrower and tucked behind ridges, it required precise navigation and timing. 2 aircraft made the principal attacks. The first attack failed to detonate effectively. The second achieved a properly placed detonation. The Eder Wall gave way. The breach unleashed a catastrophic surge into the Eder Valley, washing away bridges and houses along its course. The Sorpe Dam, constructed as an earth-filled barrier rather than mass concrete, behaved differently under attack. Upkeep was designed for a concrete face struck at an angle. Against the Sorpe, the weapon did not produce the same structural failure. Multiple attacks damaged the structure and reduced its operational capacity, but the dam did not suffer a catastrophic breach. Aircraft losses defined the mission's cost. Of the 19 Lancasters that took off, 8 failed to return. The official RAF records list approximately 53 aircrew killed, several wounded, and numerous prisoners of war captured. Ground crews and translators later documented enemy rescue operations, civilian casualties from flooding, and widespread material damage in the valleys below. Operationally, the immediate effects were twofold. First, the breaches temporarily removed significant hydroelectric capacity and water supply to industrial complexes in the Ruhr. Flooding destroyed factories, warehouses, transport links, and housing in the flood path. Second, the dam damage forced Germany to divert manpower and materials to repair civil infrastructure and restore power and transport, resources that could otherwise support armament production. However, the strategic picture was more complicated. Repair works began almost immediately. German engineers, using pumps, cofferdams, and round-the-clock labor, restored the Möhne and Eder dams to limited functionality within weeks. Full restoration of power and transport networks took longer, measured in months rather than years. Intelligence estimates at the time predicted a longer disruption. In practice, the German war industry recovered faster than some British planners had hoped. The raid also produced significant secondary effects. It delivered a tangible morale boost to the RAF and to the British public. For months, ham radio, newspapers and government bulletins amplified the story. An audacious operation had struck deep into German territory. Conversely, the operation produced severe civilian consequences. The floods destroyed homes and caused civilian deaths in downstream towns and villages. These casualties later became a subject of historical and ethical debate. For Barnes Wallis, the raid represented engineering vindication coupled with practical limits. The upkeep bomb had worked where it had to. It had exploited a narrow vulnerability and executed a novel physical principle under combat conditions. Wallis's calculations had proven accurate enough to cause structural failure in concrete dams. The weapon's success validated his insistence that carefully applied engineering solutions could deliver strategic effects that massed bombing could not. Yet the precision required by Wallis's design also became its constraint. The success depended on trained crews flying within narrow tolerances. The losses in aircraft and lives highlighted the human cost of such precision strikes. The mission exposed a fundamental tension. Weapons that depend on near-perfect execution amplify the consequences of any error. Another turning point occurred in the immediate aftermath. Military analysts assessed the raid's contribution to the Allied strategic posture. Some argued the operation had shown the value of targeted attacks against critical infrastructure. Others argued that the costs, both in lives and material, and the limited recoverable disruption to German industry made the operation less decisive than hoped. The debate influenced subsequent RAF planning and the use of specialized weapons. Operational lessons emerged rapidly. Aircraft modifications for upkeep were adapted. Training protocols for low-level night flying were refined, and specialized squadrons received clearer definitions of mission profiles. Number 617 Squadron, created for the raid, remained an elite unit and a template for future special operations requiring unique skills and equipment. Politically and symbolically, Operation Chastise was a turning point in public perception of technology in warfare. The raid showcased an engineer's role in strategic outcomes. It also reinforced a new doctrine in which small, technically sophisticated teams could achieve outsized effects, provided they received adequate support and intelligence. Within weeks, Wallis returned to his workshop and to further projects. The success of upkeep boosted his standing, but it also sharpened his sense of responsibility for the costs. He remained focused on technical improvement rather than on recognition. For the air crews and ground personnel, the raid remained a mixed legacy, a mission of extraordinary risk and concrete tactical success, but also one marked by loss and controversy. By late 1943, historians and military planners began to analyze Operation Chastise in detail. Reports highlighted the raid's tactical ingenuity and operational shortcomings. They recommended improvements in intelligence gathering, weather assessment, and redundancy in attack plans. They emphasized the necessity of aligning technical novelty with realistic expectations about enemy resilience and repair capacity. The raid closed a chapter in Wallis's wartime work. It demonstrated the potential of applied engineering to reshape operational possibilities. It also exposed the narrow margin between success and disaster, when a mission hinges on exact physics performed under hostile conditions. The Dambusters Raid marked the high point of Barnes Wallis's wartime visibility, but it was not the end of his work. After the operation, public enthusiasm rose sharply. Newspapers called him the man who broke the dams. Inside the Air Ministry, however, debate over the true strategic value continued. Wallis, characteristically analytical, turned away from publicity and focused on improving weapons design. In late 1943, he began developing new forms of earthquake bombs. The principle was similar to upkeep's underwater detonation, but applied to land targets. Rather than rely on direct hits, the weapon would penetrate the ground before exploding, sending shockwaves through soil and concrete to collapse buried structures. He calculated that a large enough bomb, dropped from high altitude at near supersonic speed, could reach reinforced bunkers and submarine pens that conventional explosives could not touch. The result was the Tallboy, a 12,000-pound weapon used for the first time in 1944. It destroyed railway tunnels, V-weapon sites, and even sank the German battleship Tirpitz in a Norwegian fjord. Later came the Grand Slam, a 22,000-pound bomb, the largest of the war. These weapons required modified Lancaster bombers stripped of armor and fitted with strengthened bomb bays, echoing the same engineering logic Wallis had applied to the bouncing bomb. By 1945, Wallis's special weapons philosophy had proven its effectiveness. Fewer bombs, delivered with precision, could produce results that thousands of conventional sorties could not achieve. The Air Ministry eventually acknowledged that his designs had introduced a new class of strategic strike capability, one that anticipated modern precision bombing decades ahead of its time. After the war, Wallis remained with Vickers Armstrongs, moving into advanced aircraft design. He returned to structural research, applying his geodesic concepts, first used in the Wellington bomber, to peacetime projects. As jet propulsion and supersonic flight emerged, he studied the problem of transonic drag and the need for wings that could adjust to speed. His research led to the concept of the variable geometry wing, later known as the swing wing design. In the 1950s and 60s, Wallis led development of the Vickers Swallow, an experimental aircraft capable of folding its wings backward during flight. It was an ambitious, futuristic design far ahead of its time. Although the British government cancelled the project in 1957, amid defence cuts, Wallis's concept laid the groundwork for later aircraft, such as the American F-111 and the European Tornado, both of which employed variable geometry wings based on principles he had outlined. Throughout his post-war career, Wallis maintained a quiet conviction that technology should serve precision and restraint, not destruction for its own sake. He advocated for research programs in aerodynamics, materials science and education, believing that future conflicts would be decided by knowledge rather than mass production. Recognition came slowly. In 1943, he received a Companion of the Order of the Bath, CB, and later a knighthood in 1968 for services to science and engineering. He was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society, and his name became synonymous with applied problem-solving under pressure. Yet Wallis himself remained uneasy about fame. The loss of life during Operation Chastise weighed heavily on him. In private letters, he expressed sorrow for the airmen who never returned and for the civilians affected by the floods. His engineering success had proven the power of science, but also its cost when bound to war. Through the 1970s and 1980s, historians reassessed his work in light of Cold War technology. The idea that a single weapon deployed with precision could achieve strategic outcomes became a foundation of modern air doctrine. Wallis's theories foreshadowed later developments in guided munitions and bunker-busting bombs, technologies that continue to rely on the same physics he demonstrated with Tallboy and Grand Slam. When he died on 30th October 1979, aged 92, obituaries described him not as a weapons inventor, but as an engineer who forced military thinking to evolve. His designs bridged two eras, from the improvised experimentation of World War II to the precision engineering of the jet age. In the final analysis, Barnes Wallis's contribution lay not only in the weapons he created, but in the philosophy he established. That accuracy, science, and innovation could outweigh brute force. His work turned theoretical equations into operational results and transformed the relationship between engineering and warfare. From the dams of the Ruhr to the airframes of the future, Wallis's legacy endures in every field where precision matters more than power. a reminder that behind every machine that changes history stands a mind that refuses to accept impossible as an answer.